Please be seated as Simon would like to come and share a few words with us.
Thank you, Father. David Norton Bentley, born September the 16th, 1943, in Dewsbury, West Yorkshire. His dad, Norman, was a gas fitter. David said his mum, Everelda, had a very strong personality. He was entered into a baby competition by one of her friends, and he won it, but she wasn't too happy. The family lived in Cleckheaton. Little David was on his way to becoming a very independent young man. He recalled climbing up a cliff as a 6-year-old on the Yorkshire coast. Everything was fine until his dad realised where he was, panicked and climbed up to get him. And in David's words, he dropped it. Next thing he remembered was being in a hotel 20 miles away with a very sore head. No concussion protocol like you get in professional sport nowadays. Not even a trip to the hospital, just parental TLC. A different time. David shared a special bond with his auntie Anne, who came to live with the family when her mum died. He was 8 and she was 16. The house only had 2 bedrooms, so they shared a room. Anne got a job in a hairdresser's, and David remembers them listening to records with Anne when she bought them. The Bentleys provided Anne with a wonderful family unit at a very traumatic time for her. David genuinely looked up to her as a big sister. He had plenty of adventures in the rolling countryside around Cleckheaton, but soon he branched out and was hitchhiking around the country and later even France as well. By this stage, he was studying at Wycliffe Mount Grammar School, where he met several friends for life, including Penny, who is here today. They were the artsy gang, and Penny and David both loved art, and their quirky, wonderful teacher, Mr. Thornton. David didn't share his parents' love of sport, especially cricket and especially Yorkshire. He was way more cultured than that. He also loved architecture and classical music. He'd read up on architectural history, and it was no surprise when he went off to study at the Architectural Association in London. Moving away from home for the first time, and with plenty of distance between himself and his family, David felt he could fully explore himself as well as life itself. Being gay in the early 1960s was still illegal. It was seriously underground. David knew this was who he was inside, but attitudes and legislation were very, very different back then. It was a challenging time for him, but he's always spoken glowingly of his first partner, John Hodges, a real Cockney geezer. They were at Chapel Market in Islington, and John sneakily bought David a little puppy when his back was turned. Chip was the last puppy on the stall, so small she fitted into a pint glass. David fed her up and was a devoted doggy dad for years to come. He spent most of the 70s working in private practice for Clive Alexander Architects, later becoming a partner. It was there he met one of his very closest lifelong friends, Sandra, who job shed there. Sandra says, David lived in a flat above the office and appeared at 10 o'clock, but work started at 9. He was still holding his sandwich in his hand, a massive 3-inch sandwich for breakfast. We all know how much David loved his food and what a good cook he was. By the late 1970s, David had fallen in love again. He met Ron Cameron, an American Marine stationed in London. David's parents were taken aback when he sold up, quit his job, and moved to San Diego to live with Ron, who was leaving the Marines to train in construction. But at least Mum and Dad did get custody of Chip. David seized his new life with both hands. He studied for and got his California State Architect's license, but he couldn't get a green card, so all the work that he did was on the sly. Ultimately, this wasn't sustainable, and after 3 years, he moved back to England, staying with Sandra until he found his feet. He didn't have a huge amount of money behind him, and he bought a shell of a house in Wood Green. There'd been an explosion there, but for an architect, it was a great project. It was in a great location, and it was cheap. David did all the drawings. David and Ron did the building between them. 11 Cumberland Road was David's home for the next 30 years. Ron moved back to America, but he and David visited each other frequently and often went on cruises together. David found his time in the US made him very employable. He worked as a product architect, designing ranges of houses in a targeted way. This was for smaller niche markets with a vision that was ahead of its time. He also spoke at a conference in 1987 about the future of smart homes. They could use fluctuations in mains electrical supply to transfer data, a bit of a precursor to the internet. He was still a great son too. He quit his job to move back to Yorkshire to care for his parents when they got old, infirm, and needed looking after. Next, he got a job with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. It took him all over in Asia and Australasia, managing embassies and maintaining diplomatic buildings. Sandra remembers being taken to the Christmas parties at the Foreign Office with a great deal of affection. David then worked for the government's Ministry of Works. This was overseeing restorations of historical buildings in the UK before winding down his career with his own consultancy, Design Aid. It was around this time that cancer and leukemia tried to get the better of him, but they couldn't. David fought them off with all of his stoic Yorkshire determination and continued to live his best life. Things took an unexpected turn in 2008 when he met me. There were 34 years between us, and I was in a manipulative relationship. But we clicked and romance blossomed. At this stage of his life, and with those ongoing health concerns, David didn't need my drama in his world, but luckily he wanted me. We'd known each other a couple of months when he said, "I'm going to try not to fall in love with you. I don't know how long I'm going to live." The answer was another 15 years, and they were packed with love, laughter, and happiness. We went to the gym together. We went on holidays together. We went out and had a good time at all kinds of nightclubs together. His wisdom, life experience, stop laughing. His wisdom, life experience, liberal attitude, macabre sense of humour, and his fun-loving nature was perfect for me. I needed someone I could look up to, learn from, and learn how to love myself with. I had a very tough year in 2010 caring for my mum. David was there for me constantly, and it meant so much when he promised her that he'd look after me. And trust me, he went way, way beyond time and time again. Hugh came into our lives. We shared holidays and fun times, but also difficult times too. I had a spine injury in 2013. The recovery brought the three of us very, very close together. David sold his house that he'd lived in forever the following year, and we moved to Staines, one of the reasons being Hugh was there already. I'd already told David that I'd love to marry him. With the age difference in mind, I couldn't bear him eventually leaving the earth without having his special day, feeling as loved as anyone ever had. A health scare for him made us pin down the date, and we got married in November 2016. It was certainly the happiest day of my life. For David, I'm not so sure, potentially more excited by some very fancy architecture in the south of France a few years earlier. Thanks. He was aware the age difference between us was becoming more pronounced as he got older. The perfect example of his loving nature was at the start of 2020, when my best friend Graham in America suddenly lost his husband Bobby. David invited Graham and his new puppy Cassie to move over to England, join the family unit, and rebuild his life with me. David was totally secure in my love for him and didn't want to do anything that held me back. In business, they call it succession planning. In relationships, maybe it's best described as love. This was all happening as the pandemic was unfolding. We found the dream home and sold our flat. Graham sold his property in the US and wired the money over. Travel restrictions meant he hadn't even seen the new house in person. Graham and Cassie moved over in November 2020. We moved in the day before New Year's Eve. It ended an impossibly difficult year for so many reasons on a real note of happiness. David still hadn't lost his zest for life. He struck up a great friendship with Don, who came into his life and enriched it massively over its following few years. So thank you, Don. And I really must thank everybody here for coming and showing their love. David's cousin Jane is here. Hopefully their relatives overseas, including Lynn in Australia, are watching right now online. David's longtime friends Dennis and John are here, as is Hugh's husband Gary, who's always had non-stop banter for David. Nala has been David's home carer for most of the last year, and he did a great job and took so much weight off our shoulders. Francis and Shirley were his colleagues 30 years ago. Julia was his neighbour in Sausage Street. My family are here. I have colleagues from work here, Simon and Andrew and Alfie and Martin, and my best friend from school, Alistair, is here. If it wasn't for Tim, David and I might never have met. He introduced us online. Dimitri's even flown over from Greece to be here. David fought his recent health troubles with bravery, taking comfort from how he'd lived his life for the previous 79 years, totally by his own rules, not following any templates, and exactly how he wanted to. Things that didn't matter washed right over him. Everything that was important to him, he made really important. When you can say you've achieved that, it's right to celebrate a life well lived, not to be too sad it's come to an end. He taught me so much about loving someone for themselves, encouraging them to be happy, and how to take joy and having that reflect back onto you. But before that, he taught me how to be happy in my own skin, and that's really helped me love him and other people too. I'll never forget him. I'm his legacy. I'll pay tribute to him every single day, just by being the man he's helped me to become. Thank you.
Thank you for those beautiful words, Simon. We're going to listen to a piece of music now.